The asphalt of Millhaven Elementary did not just tremble that morning. It shattered. The sound came first rolling down Maple Street like a wave of controlled thunder, rattling the paper decorations on the gymnasium windows, vibrating the plastic cups of lemonade on the picnic tables until the liquid inside them rippled in perfect concentric circles. Then came the chrome. 32 Harley-Davidson motorcycles turned the corner in perfect formation, two abreast, their exhaust pipes catching the Tennessee morning sun like polished mirrors. Parents standing near the chain-link fence stopped mid-sentence. Teachers dropped their clipboards. A woman in a yellow sundress grabbed her husband's arm without looking at him, her eyes locked on the road. At the head of the pack rode a man the town of Millhaven had spent years carefully avoiding. Walt Greer. Road name Forge. 6 feet 3 inches of weathered denim and scarred leather, a beard the color of iron and winter salt, a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same granite as the Tennessee hills. A scar ran along his left jaw from earlobe to chin, pale and permanent, a souvenir from a world most men in Millhaven only read about in paperback novels. His eyes, when he finally pulled off his dark riding glasses, were the flat gray of a river on a cloudy day. Cold, watchful, patient in the way that only dangerous men learn to be patient. He kicked out his stand. He stepped off the bike. The 31 men behind him did the same, and the sound of 32 kickstands dropping in near-perfect sequence was like a slow drum roll. They moved as one thing. Heavy boots on hot asphalt, chains catching the light. The parents parted for them the way water parts for something large and inevitable, stepping back without deciding to creating a corridor of frightened silence all the way to the chain-link fence at the edge of the playground. Forge walked through it. He did not look at the parents. He did not look at the principal, who had gone the particular shade of pale that comes from realizing the situation is entirely beyond any policy manual. Forge scanned the faces along the fence line with the focused patience of a man who had learned long ago exactly what he was looking for. He found her. She was small. Even for 8 years old, she was small, the kind of small that made grown men unconsciously lower their voices. Her hair was the deep red of autumn oak leaves, tangled and thick, pulled into an uneven ponytail that had already half escaped its elastic band. She was wearing a faded blue dress that had been ironed carefully, and recently the creases still sharp at the shoulders. Her sneakers were old, the left one repaired along the toe with a strip of silver duct tape. Her hands were balled into the fabric of her dress at her sides. Her left eye was a map of purples and yellows and deep bruised blue, swollen enough that the lashes on that side were barely visible. She was not crying. That was the thing that hit Forge somewhere beneath his sternum and stayed there. She was not crying. She was standing at the fence with both small hands gripping the chain link, watching him come, and her expression was not fear. It was something much older and much harder than fear. It was the face of someone who had already done all the calculating, who had already run through every other option, who was out of moves and knew it and had decided to stand up straight anyway. Forge stopped in front of her. He crouched down, the leather of his vest creaking softly until his gray eyes were level with her brown ones. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. His voice, which could fill a room like rolling thunder when he needed it to, came out low and quiet. "Sorry we are late." The girl looked at him. Then she looked past him at the 31 men standing in a wall of leather and chrome behind him. Then she looked back at his face. A smile broke across her bruised features like sunrise coming over the ridge. "It is okay, Dad," Maya Decker said. Her voice was steady and clear. "You are here now." To understand how 32 of the most feared men in Harlan County ended up at a second-grade field day on a Wednesday morning in May, you have to go back 4 days. You have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon, so hot. The heat shimmer rose off Highway 9 like something alive, and a girl with a bruised eye and $14 and a problem that most adults in this town had decided was simply not their business. Route 9 diner sat at the edge of Millhaven, the way a lot of things sat at the edge of small Tennessee towns, slightly past the point where the sidewalks ended and the gravel shoulders began, its neon sign flickering with that particular buzz that said it had been meaning to get fixed for several years now. The sign read, "Open 23 hours a day," because the O had burned out sometime in the previous administration and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. Inside the booths were patched vinyl and laminate tables in a pie case that turned slowly next to the register. The coffee was strong and the portions were honest, and the woman who kept it all running was named Donna Marsh, 61 years old, who had owned the diner since her husband Earl passed, and who ran it with the quiet, exhausted authority of someone who had seen enough of life to know that most problems could be solved with a full plate and a refilled cup. Nora Decker was on her second consecutive shift when the Tuesday afternoon rush began to thin. She was 32 years old, and she moved through the diner with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waitressing since she was 17, balancing 3 plates on one arm, remembering orders without writing them down, keeping her smile intact through the particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the weight of staying upright when the ground keeps shifting beneath you. She was a good mother. Anyone who watched her for 5 minutes could see it. The way she checked her phone between tables, not for messages, just for the time, calculating when her daughter would need to be picked up from the Murphys next door. The way she kept a small inhaler in her apron pocket that was not hers. The way she ironed Mia's dresses the night before standing in the kitchen at 11 o'clock, because the iron was the only thing left that she still had complete control over. Nora Decker had a bruise on her right wrist that she had been covering with a wide fabric bracelet for 4 days. She had a fear that lived in the back of her throat, constant and low grade, like a sound just below the range of hearing. Its name was Dale Voss. Dale Voss had not lived with them for 8 months. The leaving had not been clean because nothing about Dale was ever clean. He had shown up twice since then. The first time to take money from Nora's tip jar while Mia was at school. The second time 2 nights ago after midnight, loud and unsteady, smelling of the specific combination of cheap bourbon and resentment that Mia had learned to recognize in her sleep. Nora had tried to send him away quietly. She was always trying to do things quietly, always calibrating the volume of conflict against the thinness of the apartment walls, the lightness of a child's sleep. Dale had not wanted quiet that night. He had wanted the $60 Nora had in her purse, which was the last $60 until Friday, and when Mia had appeared in the hallway in her pajamas and placed herself between Dale and her mother without a word, Dale had made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, and his hand had moved. The police report that Deputy Marcus Holt had taken down that night read that Mia Decker had sustained a minor contusion to the left orbital region as a result of accidental contact during a domestic disturbance. Holt had written it the same way he had written everything connected to Dale Voss over the past 8 months, carefully, minimally, with an eye toward ensuring that nothing in the official record would actually stick. What Mia carried away from that night was simpler than any police report. She understood that the adults who were supposed to handle this had made their decision. She understood that her mother, who loved her ferociously and completely, was caught in a machinery of fear that love alone could not stop. She understood that Father's Day was in 4 days, and that Tommy Jenkins, who she internally still called Bryce, who was in 6th grade and large for his age, and whose father sat on the town council, had told her in the clearest possible language what was going to happen to her if she showed up to the school field day without a father. So Mia Decker, 8 years old, had begun to solve the problem herself. She had gone to the principal's office the morning after Dale's visit, her eye dark and swollen, and asked Mr. Patterson if she could be excused from the Father's Day event. Mr. Patterson had looked at her bruise with the careful non-acknowledgement of a man who had learned that some things were less complicated when not examined, and told her that attendance at the field day was strongly encouraged and that she should speak to her mother about it. She had called her Uncle Gary from the diner's landline on Sunday morning. Uncle Gary lived in Chattanooga and had always been kind to her at Christmas and on her birthday. Uncle Gary's voicemail had a message that said he was in Miami until the end of the month. She had counted and recounted the money in the ceramic frog on her windowsill, the money she had been earning since March by helping Donna wipe down tables after school 3 afternoons a week. $14 and no cents. On Tuesday afternoon, while Nora worked her second shift, and the heat rose off the highway in waves that made the distant tree line look like it was underwater, Mia Decker sat on the concrete curb at the edge of the Route 9 diner parking lot, her knees pulled to her chest, $14 folded in the front pocket of her dress, and watched the horizon. She had heard about the Iron Saints the way all children in Millhaven had heard about them in fragments and whispers, and the particular nervous quality that adults get in their voices when they are trying to appear unconcerned about something that concerns them greatly. She knew they had a compound out past the county line behind the corrugated steel fence with the no trespassing signs. She knew that Warren Stiles, whose son had been making her life a specific kind of miserable since September, talked about them at every town council meeting with the tight-jawed precision of a man pushing a boulder uphill. She knew that Sheriff Calloway neither crossed them nor protected them, maintaining a sort of armed neutrality that the whole county seemed to accept as the natural order of things. What Mia knew most concretely was this: nobody bullied them. Nobody hit them and got away with it. Nobody looked at a member of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club and decided that he was the one it was safe to hurt. She heard the engines before she saw them. The sound came from the south, from the long, straight stretch of Highway 9 that ran ruler flat between the tree lines, a low, sustained rumble that she felt in her molars before she processed it as sound. Then they appeared out of the heat shimmer, 6 of them riding in a loose formation, chrome catching the afternoon light. They turned into the diner parking lot. Mia stood up. She stood up before she had decided to, before she had time to run the full calculation of what she was about to do, because she understood on some level beneath the reach of rational thought that the time for calculating had passed. She had worked through every option available to her in the world of adults who followed rules and used proper channels and trusted the systems that were supposed to protect children, and all of those options had given her the same answer. The riders killed their engines. The silence rang. The man who stepped off the lead bike was the biggest man Mia had ever seen, and she had grown up in a county where men tended toward large. He stood with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never in his adult life needed to wonder whether he was the most significant physical presence in any given space. His arms were thick as fence posts and entirely covered in faded, intricate tattoo work. A scar ran along his left jaw. His beard was gray and heavy. When he took off his dark riding glasses, his eyes were the color of river water in November. He was reaching into his vest for a cigarette when he noticed the girl standing 10 feet away. He noticed the bruise first, before the duct-taped sneaker, before the folded fists, before the particular quality of stillness in her posture that no child of 8 should have learned yet. He noticed the bruise, and something in his face shifted, a small movement, barely visible, like a change in weather detected only by those who know where to look. Mia walked toward him. She stopped 2 feet away, which was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and she looked up at him without flinching. The other 5 riders had noticed the exchange and gone quiet, moving closer with the unconscious synchronicity of men who have spent years reading shifts in the air. She reached into her pocket and took out the folded $14 and held it out. "I need you to pretend to be my dad," she said. Her voice did not shake. It was the voice of someone who had rehearsed this, who had sat on this curb and said these words into the hot, empty air until they came out level. "Just for tomorrow. I have $14. Nobody in the parking lot said anything. The man called Forge looked down at the money in her small hand. He looked at the bruise around her eye. He looked at the folded, careful way she was holding herself upright, the way someone stands when they have been hurt recently and have decided that being hurt is not going to be the most important thing about them today. He put the cigarette back in his pocket without lighting it. He sat down on the diner's concrete step. Not tower over her, not crouch with one knee up and one hand braced on the ground like a man ready to stand again quickly. He sat down the way you sit when you are planning to stay, elbows on his knees, hands loose until his eyes were level with hers. One of the other riders, a wiry man with a shaved head and a spider web tattooed across his throat, whose road name was Cutter, saw something in that moment that he would describe to his brother-in-law 7 months later, over a beer. He saw Forge pull back his left cuff when he reached for the step. Just an inch, just enough. The name on the inside of Forge's right wrist, the one Cutter had seen 100 times, the small name in simple block letters, surrounded by a single violet blossom. Lily. Cutter had never asked about it. None of them had ever asked about it. There were things you did not ask about with Forge, the same way you did not ask certain other men about, or certain other names, or certain other years. The name was there and the violet was there, and Forge's face, which was usually the same flat gray as his eyes, had something briefly visible in it when his gaze came back up to the girls. "Keep your money," Forge said. He said it quietly with a finality that was not unkind. "What time does school start?" Mia Decker stared at him. She stared at the $14 still extended in her hand. She looked at his face and saw something there that she did not have a name for yet, something that would take her years to articulate which was the particular expression of a person who recognizes in a stranger the shape of a wound they have been carrying alone for a very long time. 9 o'clock, she said. Forge nodded once. He stood up in a single easy motion, the way large men move when their bodies have been maintained with the same careful attention they give their machines. Go back inside, he said. Tell your mother to lock the door tonight. What is your name, Mia? Mia Decker. He looked at her for one more moment with those flat gray eyes. Then he walked back to his bike, and the six Iron Saints rode out of the parking lot and back onto Highway 9. And the sound of their engines faded south toward the county line, and Mia Decker stood in the empty parking lot with $14 still in her hand and a feeling in her chest that she had never felt before. It took her a moment to identify it because it was unfamiliar. It was the feeling of having handed the heaviest thing she was carrying to someone large enough to hold it. Miles away, behind a corrugated steel fence with barbed wire at the top and no trespassing signs at intervals, the compound of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, Millhaven Charter, sat in the long Tennessee dusk. The main building was a converted machine shop, wide and low, with a long plank table down the center of the main room that had absorbed 20 years of fists and bottles and elbows, and the weight of decisions made by men who had no illusions about the world they operated in. When Forge called church that night, all 32 patch members came. They came because when Forge called, you came not out of fear in the way that word usually operates, but out of something that functions more like the pull of gravity. He had not raised his voice in anger in 4 years. He had not needed to. He stood at the head of the table and he did not talk about territory or supply or the ongoing situation with the county zoning board, which had been a low-grade irritant for 3 years and had recently begun to feel like something more deliberate. He talked about a girl named Mia Decker. He talked about $14 and a bruised eye and the specific quality of courage that exists in a person who has run out of all other options and decides to stand up straight anyway. Then he talked about Warren Stiles, Raymond Pruitt, who rode named Sledge and who stood 6'4" and 280, and who had a daughter named Grace in the second grade at Millhaven Elementary, leaned forward on his elbows. He said that Grace had told him about the Stiles boy back in October. Bryce Stiles was 12 and large and had the particular cruelty of boys who have grown up watching a certain kind of man operate in the world. He had been making Mia Decker's life systematically miserable since September. Then Sledge said the other thing, the thing that changed the temperature in the room. He said that Grace had told him something else. That Bryce had said something to Grace once in the specific way that cruel children sometimes say true things without understanding their weight. He had said, "My dad said if I make the crying girl cry enough, her mom will stop making trouble at the meetings." The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when 32 people have all understood the same thing at the same moment. Warren Stiles had been attempting to push through a rezoning resolution for 3 years. The resolution, if passed, would reclassify the industrial corridor along Highway 9 as mixed commercial development land, which would open it to purchase by outside developers, specifically a man named Preston Vance out of Atlanta, who had been quietly acquiring parcels in 3 Tennessee counties and who had, according to Scales, recently deposited a very interesting sum of money into a very interesting account. The rezoning would take the Iron Saints compound. It would also take the block of low-income housing where Nora Decker and her daughter lived. It would take Donna Marsh's diner. It would take 3 homes belonging to members of the club itself. Warren Stiles was not just a bully who raised a bully. He was a mechanism. And he had been using a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl as components. Forge looked around the table for a long moment. He said, "Tomorrow we go to the school. All of us. We go because the girl asked and we gave our word. But we also go because this is our town, and we do not let the strong use the weak as tools. Not here, not while we are still riding." The vote was unanimous, 32 hands. Wednesday morning came in clear and bright, the kind of May morning that makes Tennessee look like a painting of itself, the green of the ridgelines sharp against the sky that had no clouds in it anywhere. The school grounds behind Millhaven Elementary had been decorated with paper banners reading, "Welcome Dads" in blue and gold, and the PTA had set up a grilling station and a game area with a tug-of-war rope and a marked lane for the 3-legged race. Fathers in polo shirts and clean work boots stood in clusters talking about the same things men in polo shirts and clean work boots have always talked about at school events, their voices carrying the easy confidence of people who have never had serious cause to doubt that the world was organized primarily for their comfort. Mia arrived with her mother at 8:45. Nora had ironed the blue dress again that morning, the same careful creases at the shoulders. Mia's eye was better than it had been, the swelling reduced to a crescent of yellow-green at the edge of her socket, but it was still visible, and it was still the kind of thing that made adults look and then look away, and then find something else to focus on. Nora had her hand on Mia's shoulder as they came through the gate. The hand was light but constant, the way you keep a hand on something that matters when you are moving through uncertain terrain. Mia found a spot near the back fence and stood there. She watched the gate. The clock on the gymnasium wall read 9:12. The first events were already beginning, fathers and sons lining up for the three-legged race, the gym teacher blowing his whistle with the officious enthusiasm of a man who has finally found his arena. He is not coming, Mia thought. The thought arrived without drama, settling into her chest with the dull weight of confirmation rather than surprise. She had not fully believed he would come. She had allowed herself to believe it just enough, which is the only way hope operates in a person who has been disappointed enough times to understand its mechanics. Just enough to still be standing at the fence at 9:12, looking at the gate. Then Bryce Stiles was beside her. He was tall for 12, broad at the shoulders, wearing a new shirt with a collar. His father, Warren Stiles, materialized beside him a moment later, his linen suit impeccable, his hair arranged with the kind of precision that communicates that considerable time and intention were invested in making it look effortless. He smelled of expensive cologne and the specific confidence of a man accustomed to winning at every scale of contest the world had offered him so far. Warren Stiles looked at Mia Decker. He looked at her dress and her duct-taped sneaker and the fading bruise around her eye, and something happened in his face that was almost too small to see, a compression of satisfaction that he had the social grace to keep below the level of obvious cruelty. Some families, he said, have a harder time making these events. His voice was warm with false sympathy. He directed it at the parents standing nearby, making it communal, inclusive, a shared observation rather than an attack. "Where is your mother today, Mia?" "Still at the diner." A few of the nearby parents shifted their weight. Nobody said anything. The particular cowardice of bystanders, which requires no active cruelty and can even coexist with private discomfort, is still cowardice. And Maya had learned to recognize its shape by the way people's eyes moved to the middle distance when they did not want to be involved. Bryce was already moving toward her, the easy looseness of someone who has never been hit back, when the ground began to vibrate. It started in the soles of their feet. The plastic cups on the picnic tables rippled. The sound grew from a felt frequency into something audible, and then into something that bypassed audible entirely and became physical, a pressure against the chest, a frequency that the body processed as warning before the mind caught up with what it was hearing. Around the corner of Maple Street came 32 Harley-Davidsons riding two abreast, moving down the school zone in a formation so precise and unhurried it looked ceremonial. The sun turned every chrome surface into a secondary sun. The sound was not noise anymore. It was announcement. At the head of the column rode Forge. He was not wearing his dark glasses. His gray eyes were open and direct and focused on the gate ahead of him with an attention so complete that everything between him and it seemed to understand it needed to get out of the way. Behind him came Cutter and Sledge and 29 other men whose names the town of Millhaven knew the way towns know the names of things they have decided to carefully not think about too often. The convoy turned without slowing into the school parking lot directly over the orange traffic cones and backed 32 machines into a perfect line in the space reserved for VYCF visitors. The kickstands dropped in that slow, rippling sequence. The engines cut. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Millhaven Elementary had ever produced. 32 men dismounted. They moved toward the gate with the specific gravity of people who have arrived with a purpose and require no acknowledgement of that purpose from the people around them. The crowd parted. Nobody said a word. The principal took one look at the death's head patches on 32 leather vests and seemed to undergo a rapid interior renegotiation of his role in the proceedings. Forge walked through the gate. His eyes found Mia in the same way they had found her the day before, with the focused efficiency of someone who had already identified the single most important thing in the landscape and was navigating toward it. He saw the tears on her cheek, dried but recent. He saw Warren Stiles standing 2 feet from her with his expensive cologne and his satisfied compression of expression. He saw Bryce still with his arm half raised. He walked past Warren Stiles without looking at him. The man had to step back or be walked through, and he stepped back. Forge stopped in front of Mia. He dropped to one knee on the grass, unhurried, unbothered by the grass stains on his denim. He was level with her. His large face, which had been carved by decades into something that most people in Millhaven read as dangerous, arranged itself now into an expression that the 31 men behind him had almost never seen on it. Something open, something that could only be called gentle. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "Sorry we are late. Hit some traffic on the interstate. You ready to run this race?" Mia looked at him. She looked past his shoulder at the wall of leather and chrome and scarred, weathered men who had ridden here, all of them on a Wednesday morning for her. She looked back at his face. The smile that came onto her face was the kind that cannot be manufactured or performed. It came from somewhere below the level of decision. It came from the place where relief and disbelief in something that might become trust over time will arrive at once and dissolve the careful composure that she had been maintaining for longer than any 8-year-old should need to maintain it. She reached out and took Forge's hand. His hand was the size of a small plate. The knuckles scarred the skin rough with the particular texture of hands that have done real work in the world. Her hand disappeared into it completely. "Yeah," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and very young. "I am ready, Dad." What followed in the improbable and lasting memory of everyone who was present at Millhaven Elementary that Wednesday morning was the most unnerving and ultimately the most moving Father's Day field event the school had ever produced. Forge secured a length of nylon tie-down strap around his leg and Mia's for the three-legged race, crouching close to tell her quietly that they were not going to win on speed. They were going to win on presence. They crossed the finish line while every other father-child pair stood at the starting line still negotiating their approach. Sledge, who had come partly for club solidarity and partly because his daughter Grace had been watching Mia get bullied since September, and this was the kind of wrong he was physically constituted to correct, found Grace in the crowd and walked her to the edge of the event with the quiet simplicity of a man who has identified the right action and is performing it. Cutter bought out the entire food station, pressing folded bills into the hands of the PTA volunteers with the transaction completing efficiency of a man accustomed to settling accounts and loaded Maya's plate until it required both hands to carry. Warren Stiles watched from the bleachers with the expression of a man recalculating. He was not afraid of the bikers in the way that people who do not know him assumed he would be. He was a man accustomed to operating through systems, through leverage and process, and the patient manipulation of institutions. What he was watching on the field in front of him was a problem he had not anticipated, a variable that did not fit any of his existing models. And that fact, more than the physical reality of 32 armed men on his son's school ground, was what tightened the set of his jaw and sent him to the far edge of the bleachers to make a phone call. He dialed Marcus Holt. He spoke quietly and precisely. He used words like trespassing and gang activity, and he would like them removed in handcuffs before the event ended. He hung up satisfied with the architecture of what he had set in motion. 20 minutes later, a rusted Chevrolet pickup came over the curb into the parking lot and stopped badly next to the line of Harleys. Dale Voss got out of the truck. He was gaunt and unshaven, and his eyes had the specific redness of a man who had been angry for many consecutive days and had been maintaining that anger with the particular fuel that comes in bottles. He was not there for the event. He was there because he had learned through the particular network of grievance and habit that connects people like Dale Voss to information about the movements of people like Nora Decker, that Nora had left the diner to bring Mia her inhaler. He was there because he wanted money, and because being refused money by a woman who had subsequently managed to get a felony warrant filed against him had become a personal matter. He came across the parking lot toward the school gate with his fists closed at his sides, his eyes tracking Nora, who was standing near the gymnasium entrance with her purse in her hands, and the particular coiled stillness of someone who has spotted a predator and is deciding whether stillness or flight is the better response. "Dale," she said when he was close enough. "Not here, please." He said things that were not clean enough to repeat in a school setting and closed the remaining distance and took her wrist in his hand and applied pressure. And Nora made a sound that was short and involuntary, the kind of sound that a person makes when something hurts suddenly and without warning. From across the field, Mia heard it. She knew that sound the way she knew the sound of the engine in Dale's truck the way she knew the particular knock of his specific walk on the floorboards above the kitchen. She had been learning the sounds of danger for 8 months, right, with the thorough involuntary attention of someone whose safety depended on early detection. She turned. She saw her mother's face. She took one step toward the gate before a large hand rested on her shoulder. Not holding, not restraining, just present. She looked up. Forge was already standing, his gray eyes on the parking lot, his jaw set with a quietness that was somehow more complete than anger. He did not say anything to Mia. He moved. The shift that went through the assembled Iron Saints was not something that was communicated by words or gesture. It was the same operational awareness that had kept all of them alive through situations that did not survive detailed description, a peripheral, full-body attention to threat that never fully switches off in men who have spent years in conditions where it was necessary. One by one, and then all at once, the laughter stopped, the plates were set down, the conversations ended. 32 heads turned toward the parking lot. Dale Voss had the arm raised and the intention clear. When the hand the size of a dinner plate descended on the back of his neck, he was lifted. That was the simple fact of it. His boots left the asphalt, and he was moved through the air and deposited on the hood of his own truck with a force that expelled the air from his lungs and left him gasping. He scrambled. He tried to find his footing on the hot metal of the hood and look up at whatever had just moved him, and what he saw was Forge standing between him and the gate, unhurried, pulling on a pair of black leather riding gloves in the methodical way that a man puts on gloves when he expects to be using his hands. Behind Forge stood Cutter and Sledge and 29 other men. They had arranged themselves into a line with the automatic precision of people who have done this before in other configurations and other contexts, but always with the same essential architecture. The thing we are protecting is behind us, and you are in front of us, and the mathematics of this situation have a limited number of outcomes. Dale Voss was many things, but he was not stupid about the specific kind of stupid that gets you killed. He read the mathematics. He put his hands up. The voice that cut through the tension from the far side of the parking lot belonged to Warren Stiles. He had come off the bleachers the moment he saw Forge move the cellular memory of his phone call to Holt still warm in his hand, and he was walking fast with the urgency of a man who sees an opportunity crystallizing in real time. 2 Millhaven police cruisers turned into the lot behind him, lights going. The door of the lead cruiser opened, and Sheriff Ray Calloway stepped out. Calloway was 56 years old with gray in his hair and 28 years of reading difficult situations in the set of his face. He looked at the bikers. He looked at Stiles. He looked at Nora holding her wrist. He looked at Dale Voss on the hood of his own truck. Calloway had been sheriff of Harlan County long enough to know that the most dangerous thing in any situation was not always the most obvious thing. He walked past the bikers without a word. He walked past Warren Stiles. He stopped in front of the Chevrolet pickup. Dale Voss, he said. The tone was the tone of a man completing a sentence he had started some time ago. You missed your court date last week. Aggravated domestic battery warrant. Turn around. Stiles stepped forward. His voice was carefully calibrated outrage. Ray, these men just assaulted a citizen. I want them in handcuffs. I called you here to remove a gang from school property. Calloway looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the assembled parents. He looked at the principal who had found a courage he had not been in possession of 40 minutes earlier, and was standing now at the edge of the crowd with something like resolution in his posture. I did not see an assault, Calloway said. He kept his voice level and public. Did anyone here see an assault? What followed was one of those reversals that small towns occasionally produce when the accumulated private judgments of a community that has been performing indifference for too long suddenly cohere into a public fact. The parents who had been watching Warren Stiles operate for 3 years with the passive compliance of people who have calculated that involvement in is not worth the cost shook their heads. The principal stepped forward and said in a clear voice that Mr. Voss had appeared to trip and fall, and the gentleman had assisted him. The gym teacher, who had been afraid of Warren Stiles since the last school board meeting, nodded agreement with an enthusiasm that exceeded the situation. Warren Stiles turned to the color of a man whose architecture has failed him. Forge stepped toward him. One step. That was all. Just one step, which reduced the distance between them enough that Warren Stiles had to look directly into the flat gray eyes rather than performing composure at them from a comfortable remove. Forge did not threaten him. He did not raise his voice. He said in a register that only Styles could hear that what happened next in Millhaven was a choice, and that the choice was Warren's, and that some choices once made could not be unmade. And then he turned his back on Warren Styles and walked toward Mia. Behind him in the parking lot, Dale Voss was being guided into the rear of a police cruiser with his hands secured behind him. In the bleachers, Bryce Styles sat alone watching his father's face from a distance, and something in the set of the boy's jaw was not the satisfaction that Warren Styles would have recognized and approved of. It was something more complicated and less comfortable, the particular expression of a person who is rearranging what they thought they knew about the world they have been living in. Forge crouched down in front of Mia one more time. She had Nora's hand now, the two of them standing together at the gate with the specific solidity of people who did come through something and are still vertical. Forge reached into his vest. He unclasped a small pin from the inner lining, a simple silver shape, a wheel with small wings on either side, and pressed it into Mia's palm. "You are an honorary member of this club," he said. "You ever need us, you just look at the road." "We will hear you." Mia closed her fingers around the pin. The 32 engines fired in sequence as the Iron Saints prepared to leave, and the sound moved through the school grounds the way the sound of those engines always moved. Not just as noise, but as a declaration of continued existence, a statement made to the air itself that said, "We were here and we will be here, and the things that happened in this parking lot today are not the end of this story." Mia stood at the fence and watched them go. She held the silver pin in one hand and her mother's hand in the other. Her face was still bruised, and her sneaker was still held together with duct tape, and she was still 8 years old in a town where the wrong man sat on the city council and the wrong deputy filed the reports. But something had changed in the mechanics of the world she was living in. She could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather before the clouds arrive. She did not have a name for it yet. She would learn its name before the week was out. The phone call came at 11:40 that night. Nora was asleep. Mia was not, because she rarely was before midnight, her nervous system still calibrated to the frequencies of a household where the nights had not been safe for a long time. She heard the buzz of her mother's phone from the kitchen, and then the specific quality of silence that followed the silence of someone who has read something and not yet decided what to do with what they have read. Then Nora began to cry, not loudly, the way she cried when she was trying not to be heard. 3 miles away at the Iron Saints compound, Owen Hargrove, who was a crisply dressed man in his early 50s, who wore his patches over a pressed dress shirt and who had been called Scales since the day 8 years ago, when he walked in off a dirt road and traded his Georgia Bar Association membership for a set of colors, set a thick manila envelope on the long wooden table. Forge sat at the head of the table and read it. The letter inside was printed on official county stationery. It used words like eminent domain and immediate condemnation, and contained a timeline of 72 hours at the bottom above Warren Styles' signature. Scales told the room what Nora Decker's phone call had told Forge. That Donna Marsh had called Nora 2 hours ago weeping to say that a city health inspector had appeared at closing time with a clipboard full of citations that had never existed 3 days ago, and that the inspector had been very clear about the origin of his instructions, and that if Nora Decker's employment was not terminated by morning, the diner's operating license would be revoked before the weekend. The room was quiet for a long time. Forge looked at the letter. He looked at the hinge of Scales' jaw, which was the jaw of a man who had spent 17 years in corporate law in Atlanta, doing exactly the kind of financial architecture that produced documents like the one in the envelope, and who had at 44 walked away from it after a case in which he had won, and in winning it had helped a pharmaceutical company bury evidence that one of their products had put 11 children in the hospital, and who had never fully forgiven himself for the 17 years that preceded that day. Scales, Forge said, "Tell me you have been digging." Scales pushed his glasses up and smiled the particular smile of a man who has been waiting to show his work. "I have been digging for 4 months," he said, "and I found the whole thing." The morning after Father's Day came in quiet over Millhaven, the way mornings sometimes do after something significant has shifted in the architecture of a place when the town itself has not yet processed what it witnessed, and the air carries the specific stillness of a held breath. Forge and Scales arrived at the Decker apartment at 7:45. The building was the kind of structure that had been built in the optimistic period after the war and had been declining slowly ever since 3 stories of pale brick with window units that rattled in a stairwell that smelled of old carpet and cooking, and the particular density of lives lived in close proximity to each other across decades. The door to apartment 2C had a new deadbolt recently installed, the brass still bright against the painted wood. Nora opened it before they knocked. She had been awake since the phone call. Her eyes had the specific quality of eyes that have cried until they are dry, and then stayed open through the remaining hours of the night, not quite present, not quite absent. She was holding a mug of coffee that had been reheated twice. She looked at the two men in her doorway, one enormous and scarred and wearing the same leather vest he had worn the day before, one slight and bespectacled in a pressed shirt under his colors. And she said the thing that Forge had come to recognize as the specific language of people who have been failed by systems long enough to lose the reflex of asking for help. She said she was sorry. She said she was sorry for bringing this down on the club. She said she should have found a way to handle Dale herself, and she should not have let Mia near the diner parking lot, and she should not have allowed any of this to become their problem. Forge listened to all of it. He let her finish. Then he walked past her into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The refrigerator contained half a carton of milk, 3 eggs, a nearly empty jar of peanut butter, and a container of leftover rice. He stood looking at it for 3 seconds. He closed it. He took out his phone and called Cutter. "Bring the truck," he said. "Food run. Nothing dramatic." He hung up. Nora was watching him from the doorway of the kitchen with an expression caught between dignity and the specific exhaustion of a person who no longer has the energy to maintain the performance of not needing anything. "Sit down," Forge said. "Not unkind, just direct. Let scales talk." Owen Hargrove set his leather briefcase on the kitchen table, which was small and had a wobbly leg that had been stabilized with a folded piece of cardboard. He opened the briefcase. He laid out 3 pages of printed documents in a legal pad covered in his precise, angular handwriting. While he arranged these things, Mia appeared in the hallway. She was in pajamas, her red hair loose and tangled from sleep, holding a stuffed rabbit that had lost one ear at some point in its history. She looked at the 2 men at her kitchen table. She looked at her mother. She was the kind of child who calibrated rooms without appearing to, who read the temperature of an adult situation and made rapid adjustments to her presentation accordingly. She had been doing this since she was 6. She went to her mother's side and sat in the chair next to her without being asked. She put the stuffed rabbit on the table in front of her and looked at Scales with the patient, serious attention of someone who expected to understand what they were about to hear. Scales noted this. He adjusted his delivery accordingly. He had spent 17 years talking to boardrooms and 2 depositions talking to juries, and 8 years talking to men who had not gone past 10th grade in most cases, and he knew how to read a room. He directed his explanation at Nora while making sure the shape of it was accessible to the 8-year-old sitting beside her with a one-eared rabbit and the attentiveness of a small judge. He told them what 4 months of digging had produced. Warren Stiles had been on the Millhaven City Council for 6 years. In the first 2 years, he had done what small-town politicians do when they are building the foundation of a longer project. He had attended every ribbon cutting and every church pancake breakfast and every little league game, and he had cultivated the specific social credit that comes from being visible and pleasant and never asking for anything obvious too soon. By year 3, he had enough accumulated goodwill to begin steering the council toward positions that, examined in isolation, seemed like reasonable development policy, and examined in sequence formed a clear and profitable pathway. The plan was called Ridgeline Partners, LLC, registered in Delaware with a mailing address that was a mail forwarding service in Wilmington. Ridgeline Partners was the vehicle through which a man named Preston Vance, a developer out of Atlanta, who had spent the last 4 years quietly accumulating distressed commercial and industrial land in rural Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia, would pay Warren Stiles for the work of making that accumulation possible. The payments had been structured with some care, not direct, not obvious, routed through a series of intermediary transactions that would require a certain kind of expertise to trace. Scales had that expertise. He had spent the better part of 2 decades building exactly these kinds of structures for people who had more money than conscience, and he knew every seam. The amount he had traced so far was $1.4 million. There was likely more. The rezoning resolution that Stiles had been attempting to pass for 3 years would reclassify the entire Highway 9 industrial and low-income residential corridor as mixed commercial development land. This would make it available for purchase by Vance's holding companies at assessed value, which in a rural Tennessee corridor that had seen no investment in 20 years would be a fraction of what the land was worth once a regional shopping complex was built on it. The resolution would displace the Iron Saints compound. It would displace the apartment building where Nora and Mia lived. It would displace Donna Marsh's diner, which sat on a parcel that was Scales noted particularly valuable, given its highway frontage. It would displace three families of club members who owned their homes outright and had lived on that corridor for a combined total of 61 years. Warren Stiles had not been trying to clean up Millhaven. He had been selling it. Nora sat very still through all of this. She had the expression of someone watching the explanation of something they had felt in their body for a long time finally take shape in language. Mia was quiet for a moment after Scales stopped talking. Then she said, "So he made Bryce make me cry so that you would be scared and not pay attention to what he was doing to your building." She said it not as a question, as a summary. Scales looked at her over his glasses. "Essentially, yes," he said. Mia nodded once slowly, the way someone nods when a piece of information has confirmed something they already suspected but needed confirmed. She reached out and straightened the one-eared rabbit on the table so that it faced the room squarely. Then she stood up and said she would be right back. She came back 4 minutes later, carrying a composition notebook, the kind sold at the Dollar General for 79 cents, its cover decorated with small hand-drawn flowers. She set it on the table in front of Scales. He looked at her. She said, "I wrote down everything I could remember. About Dale, I did not know if it would help. But you said evidence was important, so I wrote it down." Scales opened the notebook. The handwriting was the large, slightly uneven print of a child who has been writing seriously for only a few years. The letters carefully formed with the concentration of someone who understands that the shapes of words matter. The entries were dated going back 8 months. They recorded times and days and specific things that were said and specific amounts of money that were taken. They were written in the flat factual register of someone who has understood that the most useful thing you can do with a frightening experience is to document it accurately, and who has been doing this without being taught to, which means she had arrived at that understanding on her own. Scales read through all 14 pages without speaking. Then he turned to the page dated 4 months ago and read the entry there twice. He looked up at Mia. "Did you understand what you were writing here," he said, "when you wrote this part?" Mia looked at the page. She said Dale was on the phone. "He did not know I was in the hallway. He said, 'Do not worry, Holt will lose the file again.' I did not know what it meant, but I wrote it down because you said write everything." Scales took his glasses off. He cleaned them on the hem of his shirt with the methodical deliberateness of a man buying himself a moment to think. He put them back on. He looked at Forge. "This is the connection," he said quietly, "between Dale and Holt. She gave us the bridge." Forge was looking at Mia with an expression that the 31 members of the Iron Saints who knew his face would have recognized as rare. Not approval exactly, something more complete than that. The expression of a person encountering something that partially restores their faith in the durability of certain qualities in the world. "You did good," he said. His voice was low and even. "You did real good, Mia." Mia sat back down next to her mother. She picked up the one-eared rabbit and held it in her lap. Her face was composed, but underneath the composure there was something that had relaxed slightly. Some fraction of the permanent vigilance. She carried some small muscle that had been clenched for a very long time, which had in the last 60 seconds loosened. Outside, a truck pulled up. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Cutter's voice in the hallway, not dramatic, not announcing itself, just efficient. "Where do you want it?" 3 bags of groceries were set on the kitchen counter. Bread and eggs and milk and fruit and a rotisserie chicken still warm in its bag and 2 kinds of cereal and a container of orange juice and several other things. Cutter set them down and left without coming fully into the kitchen, the same way you leave something at a door without requiring acknowledgement. Nora stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the groceries for a long moment. Then she began putting them away, moving with the slow care of someone performing an action that means more than the action itself. Mia watched her mother. She watched the groceries go into the refrigerator one item at a time. She watched the refrigerator door close. She did not say anything. She did not need to. What Owen Hargrove, who had spent half his professional life in the company of people who knew exactly how money moved and where it went when it needed to disappear, laid out for the Iron Saints. That Thursday night was not a theory. It was an architecture. It had walls and floors and a foundation, and each structural element had a corresponding document or transaction record or email chain attached to it, and the whole thing had been assembled with the kind of patient, methodical thoroughness that only comes from someone who spent 2 decades learning how to build these structures and is now applying that knowledge in reverse. Ridgeline Partners, LLC, had received 14 transfers over 22 months. Each transfer had originated from a holding company controlled by Preston Vance. Each holding company had a name that referenced something geological. Ridgeline Quarry Holdings, Stone Creek, Capital Bluff, View Investments. The amounts ranged from $40,000 to $320,000. The routing went through 2 intermediate accounts, one in Delaware and one in the Cayman Islands, before landing in an account whose beneficial owner, as identified in the incorporation documents, Scales had obtained through a contact at a corporate registry service he had used during his Atlanta years, was Warren Stiles. The FBI field office in Nashville had been sent a digital copy of the complete file at 3 that afternoon, with a cover letter written by Scales that used the specific statutory language he knew would produce urgency rather than a queue number. He had received a confirmation of receipt at 4:15. He had received a follow-up call at 5:47 from an agent whose tone, without confirming anything, explicitly communicated that the routing numbers had been verified and that the timing of the evening's town hall meeting was of interest to the federal government. Scales laid all of this out for the assembled club with the composed precision of a man who has waited a long time to use the skills he spent a career accumulating for purposes that had something to do with justice rather than the engineering of its evasion. But there was a problem. The eminent domain resolution was scheduled for a vote at tomorrow night's open town hall. The vote with the current council composition and Stiles's accumulated political leverage would pass. Even with a federal investigation opening, the resolution could be filed and the clock could begin ticking on displacement orders before any federal action moved fast enough to stop it. And Stiles, who had enough experience with process to know where the procedural windows were, would understand that the window between a vote and a federal hold was exactly the kind of gap you could drive a bulldozer through if you move quickly. Additionally, Scales had learned in the last 2 hours that Stiles had directed Marcus Holt to access the evidence storage at the county building and retrieve or destroy the physical documentation connected to the Vance transaction that had been obtained as part of a separate county procurement audit the previous year. The audit had been buried, but the physical documents still existed in a locked filing cabinet in the county administrator's office. If those documents were destroyed tonight, the federal case became substantially thinner. The Ridgeline Partners contract, Scales said, is the cornerstone. If we go into that meeting tomorrow night without it, we have bank records and email chains that a good defense attorney could spend 18 months casting doubt on. With the physical contract in hand, signed by both Stiles and a Vance representative, with the LLC stamp, the case is structural. It cannot be argued away. The building opens for the cleaning crew at 6 in the morning, he said. The shredding is likely happening tonight or in the very early hours. If we are there at 6 before the administrative staff arrive, and if someone has left the side door accessible, we may be able to get to that filing cabinet before Holt does. The room considered this. Then Forge looked at Scales and said the thing that the room needed him to say, which was the thing that made the Iron Saints what they were in the moments that mattered. He said, "We do not go in as a club. We go in as citizens. Tomorrow night we put on suits. We walk into that hall in front of this whole town, and we do this correctly. No intimidation, no leverage. Evidence and law in the public record. We make them answer for it in front of every person in Millhaven who has been looking the other way for 3 years. And we do it so clean that nobody can look at what happened and call it anything other than justice." He paused. He looked around the table at 31 men who had spent their adult lives operating in the spaces that existed outside the systems that had failed them, who had built their own code in the absence of the institutional version, who had learned to trust each other precisely because they had stopped trusting the structures that were supposed to make trust between strangers possible. He said Mia Decker walked up to the scariest thing she could think of and asked for help. That took more courage than anything I have seen in a long time. We are not going to answer that by being the thing this town thinks we are. We are going to answer it by being the thing she believed we were when she walked across that parking lot. The vote was 32-0. The night moved toward morning with the particular slowness of nights when something is going to happen in a few hours and the body knows it and will not allow real sleep. Forge sat in the garage of the compound after the meeting on an overturned milk crate next to his road glide, the one he had been riding for 11 years, in which he maintained with an attention that the other members of the club privately understood had something to do with the way some men form attachments to objects that are present during the significant periods of their lives. The garage smelled of motor oil and metal and the particular dusty warmth of a space that is used and functional and never quite cleaned. One overhead light was on. Outside, the Tennessee night was full of insect sound, the ridge beyond the fence line dark against the sky with more stars in it than most of the country ever sees. He was thinking about Lily. He thought about Lily with a regularity that had not diminished over the years, not in the way people who have not lost someone that way sometimes imagine grief works, not with decreasing frequency as time accumulates. It was more like a sound that you stop noticing because it is always present. And then sometimes in the quiet, you notice it again. Lily had been 9 years old. She had been thin and quick, and she had laughed at things that other children did not find funny, a quality that had been entirely her own, and that he had not in the years since encountered again in quite the same form in any other person. She had been afraid of deep water and unafraid of large animals, and she had been in the specific way that children are before the world teaches them not to be completely honest about what she felt and what she needed. He had been inside for 8 months when she died. A cycling accident on the road she had ridden 100 times, the one that ran along the eastern edge of town between the houses and the tree line, in the early evening when the light came through the trees at the angle that makes everything on that road look like it is inside a painting. A car that should not have been in that lane at that moment. A driver who had been making the same drive for 15 years and had been on his phone and who had in the subsequent legal proceedings been apologetic and devastated, and who had also walked away with a shalom and a suspended license in the rest of his life. His daughter had not walked away. The thing that Forge had been carrying for 20 years, the specific weight of it, was not simply grief. It was the unresolvable arithmetic of the fact that she had been alone, that whatever the last moments were, whatever she had needed, whoever she had wanted, he had not been there. He had been in a facility 200 miles away, and she had been on a road in the early evening light, and she had been alone, and there was no resolution available for that fact in any framework he had ever encountered. You could not apologize to someone who was not there to receive the apology. You could not keep a promise to someone who was not there to collect on it. He had kept her name on his skin because he needed the reminder that the weight existed. Because men like him, in the life he had chosen, developed a certain facility for not feeling certain things, and he did not want to develop that facility with respect to Lily. He had kept a drawing she made in the weeks before he went in. A small drawing in crayon on the back of a gas station receipt, a man and a girl standing next to what was identifiably meant to be a motorcycle, and beside them a small triangular shape that he eventually understood was meant to be a dog, because she had been asking for a dog for the better part of a year, and he had kept saying, "Soon we will get one soon," which was the kind of soon that children understand means not yet, but which she had accepted without complaint, because she was at 9 more patient with him than he had ever been with himself. He kept the drawing in his wallet in the fold behind his license. It had been there for 20 years. The paper was soft with age, the crayon colors faded to pale versions of themselves. The sound at the garage door was light, a small knuckle unhurried. He looked up. Mia was standing in the doorway in pajamas and sneakers with no laces, her red hair loose, the one-eared rabbit tucked under her arm. She looked at him across the lit garage with the calm directness. She had the quality that he had noticed in the parking lot and that had not diminished in the days since. "Donna said you sit here by yourself sometimes," she said. "I brought you something." She held out a glass of milk. He looked at the glass of milk for a moment. Then he shifted on the milk crate, moving slightly to one side in the way that creates space without requiring explanation. She came across the garage and sat down beside him on the concrete floor, her back against the workbench, the glass of milk now between them. She looked at the motorcycle. She looked at the tools hung with precise spacing on the pegboard above the bench. She looked at the light. She did not say anything. Neither did he. They sat in the garage in the late quiet while the insects made their sound outside, and the stars did what stars do over rural Tennessee, which is to assert themselves with an intensity that urban light never quite erases in people who grew up under them. The milk crate and the concrete floor, and the smell of motor oil, and the specific silence of two people who have both learned to be comfortable with silence, one through decades of living, and one through the specific education of an 8-year-old's long, difficult year. After a while, Mia said without looking at him, my dad left before I could remember him. I used to wonder what he looked like. I do not wonder that anymore. She said it in the flat informational register she used for things she had already processed completely and was now simply reporting. Forge did not respond immediately. He looked at the motorcycle. He looked at his hands, which were large and scarred, and had done things in the world that he would not describe to an 8-year-old. Then he said, "You did a brave thing this week." Mia considered this. Then she said, "You did too." He looked at her. She was looking at the motorcycle with the patient attention of someone genuinely interested in the thing they are looking at. She was not performing anything. She was just there sitting on the concrete floor of his garage at whatever hour it was with her rabbit and her glass of milk and her complete and matter-of-fact presence. He reached into his wallet. He held the drawing for a moment. She did not notice. He put it back. He was not ready for that yet, but he held it in the dark inside the leather, and the holding felt like something adjacent to possible in a way it had not felt in a long time. At 5:48 in the morning, while the ridge beyond Millhaven was beginning to distinguish itself from the sky in the first pale gray of dawn, Scales and Sledge parked 2 blocks from the county administrative building and walked the rest of the way on foot. They were wearing dark clothes that were not the colors of the club. They were not there as Iron Saints. They were there as 2 men who needed to be in a building before the people who wanted to destroy something in that building arrived. The side door, the one that opened onto the service corridor that the cleaning crew used, was unlocked. Scales noted this without comment. Someone had wanted them to be able to enter. He had not asked who. He had his suspicions, and they were the kind of suspicions that would make more sense in the next 24 hours. Inside the building had the hollow fluorescent quality of institutional spaces in the early morning before the human activity that animates them has resumed. Their footsteps were careful. Scales knew the layout because he had spent 3 weeks visiting the county administrator's office in his capacity as a private citizen requesting public records, which was a right available to every citizen in Tennessee, regardless of what leather they wore on weekends, and he had used those visits to understand where things were kept. The filing cabinet was in the records annex off the main administrator's office. It was a 4-drawer gray metal cabinet with a keyed lock. The key was kept in the administrator's desk. The drawer they needed was the 3rd one. The county-level procurement audit documents for the previous fiscal year, which contained a paper trail connecting a series of contracts that Warren Stiles had steered through the council to LLCs that shared a registered agent with Ridgeline Partners, were in a green accordion folder in the 3rd drawer. Scales removed the folder. He opened it. He checked the documents against the list he had memorized. Everything was present. At the back of the folder beneath the procurement documents was a document he had not known to look for. A signed contract between the City of Millhaven, represented by its authorized council member, and Ridgeline Partners, LLC, represented by its principal officer for the exclusive negotiation rights to the Highway 9 corridor parcels, subject to the rezoning resolution contingent on passage of that resolution. The contract was dated 14 months ago. It bore Warren Stiles' signature in blue ink and the LLC stamp of Ridgeline Partners, and a sum that functioned as a deposit against future commission. Scales stood in the fluorescent light of the records annex and read the contract twice. Then he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket and closed the drawer and walked back out the way he had come in. In the car, he called Forge. "We have the cornerstone," he said. Then his phone buzzed with a text message from a number he did not recognize. He read it. He read it again. He showed it to Sledge, who read it and looked at Scales with an expression that combined surprise with something like recognition. The message said, "He is going to try to have you removed from the meeting before you can speak. Tell the sheriff first. The county charter requires public comment before any land seizure vote. He cannot override that. I am sorry about what I did to Mia. I did not understand what I was doing." Signed BB, Sledge said slowly. Scales looked at the number. Tennessee area code, probably a school friend's phone. Probably sent in the minutes after lights out in a house on the better side of Millhaven, by a 12-year-old boy sitting in the dark doing the most difficult thing he had done in his short life, which was to understand that his father was wrong in a way that required action rather than loyalty. Scales forwarded the message to Forge with a single line of his own appended to it. The message said the kid has more spine than his father. The suits came from a dry cleaner on Route 12 that Sledge knew because his cousin had gotten married there the previous year and had ordered rental formal wear for the entire wedding party. 32 men arrived in ones and twos through the afternoon, trying on jackets with the particular physicality of men for whom formal clothing is a genuinely unfamiliar constraint, adjusting lapels and tugging at collars, and accepting Scales as measured guidance on what constituted acceptable fit with varying degrees of cooperation. Cutter looked at himself in the full-length mirror and said he looked like he was going to his own parole hearing. Several people agreed. Cutter said he was not sure if that was better or worse than looking like himself, and nobody had a definitive answer. Forge stood in the back of the dry cleaning shop in a charcoal suit that fit the geometry of him. Surprisingly well, a white dress shirt and a dark tie that Scales had selected and tied for him without comment. He had trimmed his beard. His scarred jaw was visible, his gray eyes steady above it. He looked, Scales thought privately, like someone who had spent 30 years operating outside the frameworks of institutions and was now for one evening walking back in through the front door with everything he had learned during those 30 years fully intact and not hidden. Nora arrived with Mia at 6:30. Nora was in a dark dress, her hair pinned up, the wide bracelet still on her right wrist. Mia was in a navy dress that Nora had bought 3 weeks ago for a school recital and had not worn yet. Her red hair had been braided, the braid neat and tight. She was wearing the silver wing pin on the left side of her dress over her heart. Forge crouched down when he saw her. "You look like someone important," he said. Mia looked at his suit. She reached out and straightened his tie, which had come slightly askew during the process of Scales tying it. She was precise and matter-of-fact about it, the way she was about most things. "You do too," she said. They walked to the town hall meeting at 7 o'clock, 32 men in dark suits, and 2 women and 1 8-year-old girl in a navy dress moving through the streets of Millhaven toward the building where a man who had been selling their town intended to finish the transaction tonight. The building was lit from inside. Through the tall windows, they could see the hall was already full. Forge put his hand briefly on top of Mia's head. Not holding, not restraining, just present the way a hand on the shoulder of something that matters feels in a moment before a thing you have been building toward finally arrives. He looked at Scales. Scales nodded. They went in. The Oak Haven Town Hall was a historic building with high ceilings and wooden floors that had been walked on by enough generations to develop their own particular voice. A low creak that moved through the room in waves as people shifted and settled, and the weight of the assembled crowd redistributed itself across the old boards. By 7 o'clock, every seat was filled, and people were standing 3 deep along the back wall and along both sides, pressed close enough that the room had the specific warmth of a space containing more bodies than it was designed to hold. The citizens of Millhaven had come for different reasons. Some had come because word of the eminent domain notice had spread through the Highway 9 corridor, and they were frightened about what it meant for their own properties and their own leases, and their own lives that had been built over decades on land that had not previously been considered valuable enough for anyone powerful to want it. Some had come because they had been at the school field day and had not yet finished processing what they had seen. Some had come because Warren Stiles had called in every civic obligation he had accumulated over 6 years of ribbon cuttings and pancake breakfasts and Little League sponsorships, and they were there out of the kind of loyalty that is really just the long tail of social debt. Some had come because small towns have their own gravity, and when something large is about to happen in a place where most things are small, the pull of it is nearly irresistible. Warren Stiles sat at the raised dais at the front of the room with the other 3 council members arranged on either side of him, and he sat the way he always sat in his public role, with the performed comfort of a man at home, in the center of a room, his linen jacket pressed and his hair arranged, and his gold pen tapping a slow, confident rhythm against his microphone. He had been doing this work for 6 years, and he understood that rooms like this one were not decided by arguments. They were decided by atmospheres, by who seemed like the most inevitable thing in the space. He had made phone calls that afternoon. He had spoken to his attorney who had confirmed that the eminent domain resolution was legally sound. He had spoken to Marcus Holt, who had confirmed that the document retrieval had been completed. He had spoken to Preston Vance, who was at a hotel in Nashville, waiting to hear the outcome of the vote before driving to Millhaven to begin the formal acquisition process. Warren Stiles believed he had won. He had won the same way he had won everything in the last 6 years, by being more patient than the opposition, by controlling the institutional levers, by understanding that in any contest between a man in a suit who knew how the system worked and a collection of leather-wearing outlaws who operated outside it, the system always had the longer reach. He tapped his pen, he looked at the room, he waited for the meeting to begin. The doors at the back of the hall opened at 7:03. The sound that came in was not the sound anyone in that room had prepared for. It was not the sound of engines which the assembled citizens had unconsciously anticipated carrying with them the residue of every story they had ever told themselves about who the Iron Saints were and how they operated. It was the sound of shoes on the wooden floor, dress shoes, moving with quiet collective deliberateness. 32 men in dark suits walked through the doors of the Millhaven Town Hall. The room did not erupt. It went the other way entirely. It went to a silence so complete that the creak of the floorboards under 32 pairs of unfamiliar dress shoes was the loudest thing in the building. People turned. People stared. People made rapid adjustments to the version of events they had been constructing in their minds since the field day, since the eminent domain notice, since the whisper network of a small town had been working overtime for 3 days. The suits were dark and pressed and fitted with varying degrees of success, but what they communicated was not elegance. What they communicated was intention. These were not men who had dressed this way because it was natural to them. They had dressed this way because the occasion required it, and because they had made a decision about what kind of men they were going to be in this room tonight, and they were executing that decision with the same total commitment they brought to everything else. Forge walked at the front. He was not wearing his dark glasses. His gray eyes moved across the room with the same flat, patient attention they brought to every space, reading the exits and the face and the lines of force running between people the way men like him learned to read rooms. His jaw was set. His suit was charcoal. The scar along his jaw was not hidden. Beside him, her navy dress pressed and her red braid tight, and the silver wing pin over her heart, walked Mia Decker. She had her chin level and her eyes forward, and her small hand in Forge's large one, and she walked with the particular bearing of someone who has decided that whatever this room contains, she is not going to let it be bigger than she is. On Forge's other side walked Nora, her dark dress and pinned hair, and the careful composure of a woman who has been afraid for a long time and has decided that tonight she is finished with the performance of not being afraid because there is nothing left to protect by performing it. Behind them came Scales and Sledge and Cutter and 28 others, two abreast, filling the center aisle of the town hall, in the side aisles and the space along the back wall, until the room contained the full arithmetic of them. 32 men who had been described in council meetings and newspaper editorials and casual conversation as the worst thing about Millhaven, standing in the room where the future of Millhaven was about to be decided in dark suits with their hands at their sides. Warren Stiles gripped his gold pen. He looked at the doors for Marcus Holt, who was supposed to be there, who was supposed to be standing near the entrance with 2 additional officers in case the situation required management. Holt was not at the door, Order Stiles said into his microphone. His voice carried the strain of a man applying his professional control to something that is pulling against it. We will call this meeting to order. Resolution 404 regarding the rezoning and condemnation of the Highway 9 Industrial Corridor is the primary item of business tonight. We will proceed directly to the vote. From the back wall, a voice said, "County Charter requires a period of public comment before any land seizure vote. That is not optional." The voice belonged to Ray Calloway. He was standing against the back wall with his arms folded, not in uniform in civilian clothes, which in Millhaven meant that he was there as a citizen and not as an officer, a distinction that was technically meaningful and practically significant. He had been standing there for 10 minutes before the Iron Saints arrived. He had been standing there since he finished a phone call at 6:45 with an agent at the FBI field office in Nashville who had asked him, with the careful politeness of federal officials who do not want to be impolite while making their requirements clear, to ensure that the evening proceeded in an orderly manner and that all public record requirements were fulfilled before any vote was conducted. Stiles looked at Calloway. Something passed through his expression, a reassessment, a recalculation of which pieces were where on the board. Fine, Stiles said. 5 minutes of public comment. Does any citizen wish to address the council? Scales walked to the podium at the front of the room. He set his leather briefcase on the wooden surface and opened it with the practiced efficiency of a man who has stood at podiums and presented documents for a living for nearly 2 decades. He adjusted the microphone. He looked up at Warren Stiles with the direct, composed regard of a man who has been in rooms like this one many times and who understands that what happens in the next few minutes is not really about the room. "My name is Owen Hargrove," he said. His voice was clear and carried to every corner of the high-ceiling space with the particular authority of someone trained in precisely this. "I am the legal counsel for the property owners and residents of the Highway 9 corridor, and I am here to submit into the public record a set of documents relevant to Resolution 404. He removed the documents from the briefcase. He set them on the podium in a neat stack. "The first item," he said, "is a set of banking records for a Delaware-registered limited liability company called Ridgeline Partners. These records show 14 wire transfers totaling $1.4 million, originating from holding companies controlled by Preston Vance, of Vance Development Group, Atlanta, Georgia, over a period of 22 months. A murmur moved through the room. Stiles's pen stopped tapping. "The second item," Scales continued, "is the Articles of Incorporation for Ridgeline Partners, LLC, listing its sole beneficial owner and authorized signatory." He paused. He looked up at the room, not at Stiles specifically, at the room. "The sole beneficial owner is Warren Stiles, sitting council member for the city of Millhaven." The room went loud. Not the organized noise of a debate, but the uncontrolled sound of multiple people processing the same information at the same time, which is a sound that has something cellular in it, a sound that rooms make when they are reorganizing around a new understanding of what they contain. Stiles was on his feet. His voice came out with the specific pitch of a man applying maximum control to something that is pulling very hard in the direction of panic. "These are fabricated documents," he said. "These men are career criminals. Whatever they have manufactured in an attempt to derail a legitimate development initiative, I assure this council and this community that it will be examined and it will be found to be exactly what it is, which is a bad faith attempt by an organized criminal enterprise to interfere with lawful municipal process." He was good at this. Even now, even with the room shifting under him, he was good at it. He had spent 6 years building a voice that people in Millhaven recognized as the voice of authority, and authority has inertia, and he was leaning on that inertia with everything he had. Scales reached into the briefcase a third time. He removed the accordion folder from the county records annex. He removed from inside it the signed contract between the city of Millhaven and Ridgeline Partners, LLC, 14 months old, bearing Warren Stiles' signature in blue ink and the LLC stamp and the deposit sum. He held it up so the room could see it. "The third item," he said, "is the original signed contract between this council member and Ridgeline Partners obtained from the county records annex this morning before it could be destroyed. It predates the rezoning resolution by 14 months. It establishes that Warren Stiles committed to deliver this community to Preston Vance before he ever asked this community for its vote." This time the room did not murmur, it roared. The council members on either side of Stiles pushed their chairs back from the dais in a movement that was physical and also entirely symbolic, the involuntary distancing of people who understand that they are sitting next to something that is about to collapse and do not want to be adjacent to it when it does. Stiles pointed at Forge. His hand was shaking. "This man and his organization have been terrorizing this community for years," he said. "Whatever they have produced is inadmissible. I am requesting that Sheriff Calloway remove these individuals from this building immediately." Calloway unfolded his arms. He walked slowly from the back wall down the center aisle of the town hall, past the rows of seated citizens, past Forge and Mia and Nora to the front of the room. He stopped in front of the dais. He looked up at Warren Stiles with the expression of a man who has been patient about something for a considerable period of time and has now reached the end of his patience. "I have been in contact with the FBI field office in Nashville since this afternoon," Calloway said. "The routing numbers in Mr. Hargrove's documents have been independently verified by federal investigators. The contract he is holding is a certified copy of a document whose chain of custody has been established." He reached into his jacket and removed his handcuffs. Warren Stiles, he said, I am placing you under arrest for extortion, bribery of a public official and wire fraud. Step down from the dais. The pause that followed was not long. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Warren Stiles stood at the raised dais of the Millhaven Town Hall and looked at the room that had been his arena for 6 years, the room where he had cultivated and leveraged and arranged and maneuvered with the patient skill of a man who believed that sufficient preparation made outcomes inevitable, and he saw that the arrangement he had constructed was not rearrangeable. Every piece of it was where it was, and what it added up to was finished. He stepped down. Calloway turned to the side of the room where Marcus Holt was standing, having arrived 3 minutes earlier through the side door, with an expression that told Calloway everything he needed to know about where Marcus Holt's loyalty had been for the past 8 months, and what Marcus Holt had spent that evening doing before he ran out of time. Marcus Calloway said, You know what this is? Holt looked at the floor. He nodded. He put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs went on Warren Stiles first, then Marcus Holt. They were walked through the center aisle of the Millhaven Town Hall, past the rows of citizens who had been performing indifference for 3 years, and who were now in the sudden absence of the thing that had made indifference the safest option, doing something else. Some of them were standing. The sound that built in the room as the two men were walked to the door was not polite applause. It was something rawer and less organized than applause, the sound of a community exhaling something it had been holding without full awareness that it was holding it. Mia Decker stood in the crowd near the center aisle and watched Warren Stiles pass 6 feet from her. She did not move. She did not look away. She watched him the way she had watched the resolution unfold all evening, with the complete and steady attention she brought to things that mattered. And when he had passed and was out the door, and the sound of the room was rising around her, she did not cheer or pump her fist or make any of the gestures available to a person in the moment of a victory they have worked toward. She breathed out, a single, slow, complete exhalation, the kind that comes from somewhere very deep in the body, the kind that has been waiting a very long time to happen. Forge felt it. He was standing close enough. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and what passed between them in that look was the specific understanding that exists between people who have come through something together and arrived against whatever odds were operating on the other side of it. She reached up and took his hand. The week that followed was in the specific texture of its events, not the dramatic kind. The dramatic things had already happened. What the week contained was the slower, quieter work of consequences settling into place. Federal investigators arrived in Millhaven on Friday morning and in 2 vehicles and spent 3 days at the county administrative building with boxes and hard drives. Preston Vance was reached by federal agents at his hotel in Nashville on Friday afternoon before he could leave the state, and his subsequent conversation with his attorney was the beginning of a process that would eventually see him enter a plea agreement in which the name Warren Stiles featured with considerable prominence. Warren Stiles was held without bail pending arraignment. Marcus Holt was suspended pending investigation, the third such suspension in his career, the first 2 having been for things that were now beginning to look like a pattern rather than isolated incidents. The eminent domain resolution did not pass. The 3 remaining council members in an emergency session 2 days after Warren Stiles' arrest voted unanimously to table it indefinitely. 2 of them issued statements expressing surprise at the revelations about their colleague. The third, a woman named Patricia Alvarez, who had been the only council member to vote against the resolution 3 times in 3 years, did not issue a statement. She sent a handwritten note to Scales that said simply, I knew something was wrong. I did not know how to prove it. Thank you. The injunction that Scales filed on behalf of the Highway 9 corridor residents was granted by a federal judge in Nashville on Monday. It named Ridgeline Partners Vance Development Group in the city of Millhaven as respondents and prohibited any action against the properties in question pending the outcome of the federal proceedings. The properties for the first time in 3 years were safe. Donna Marsh got a letter from the city on Thursday rescinding the health citations against Route 9 Diner, attributed in the letter to an administrative error. Donna read the letter at the counter in her apron and then set it face down on the laminate surface and looked at the lunch crowd filling her booths. She thought about all the things she had not said and all the things she had not done and the weight of the 3 years behind her, and she was quiet for a long time, in the specific way of a person tallying something they cannot fully calculate. The conversation between Scales and Donna happened the following Monday in the home office of the diner after closing with the chairs upended on the tables and the smell of cleaning solution and the fluorescent light in the back office humming its single note. Donna was 61 years old and she had been running the diner since she was 44, and she had been tired in the way that she was tired for the last 5 years of it. Not unhappy, not resentful, but the specific tiredness of a person who has been doing a thing for long enough that the doing of it has used up most of what they had available for it. She wanted to stop. She had wanted to stop for 2 years and had not stopped because stopping required someone to sell to, and the only offer she had received had been from a Vance subsidiary that was making the same offer to every property on the corridor, and accepting it would have meant being complicit in exactly what she had been quietly terrified of. Scales made her a different offer. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. Millhaven Charter had voted the previous Thursday to purchase Route 9 Diner at fair market value in cash from a cashier's check drawn on the club's operating account. The purchase price was what the diner was worth, not what a developer would have paid in a distressed acquisition. Donna had 30 days to accept or decline. There were no conditions on the acceptance. If she wanted to stay on in any capacity, there would be a role for her. If she wanted to retire to Knoxville where her daughter lived, which was a thing she had been talking about for 3 years, that was also available. Donna looked at the offer letter that Scales had prepared, which was a real document, properly formatted, with the legal language in the right places and the numbers written out both numerically and in full. And she thought about Earl, who had bought this place with her in the optimistic period of their early marriage. And she thought about the 33 years she had put into it. And she thought about what it meant to be able to leave something you have built for a long time in the hands of people who will keep it going rather than people who will flatten it. She signed it that night. On the Thursday following the sale, Nora Decker sat at the same kitchen table where Scales had laid out the documents of Warren Stiles' corruption in the same chair, with the same wobbly legs stabilized by the same piece of folded cardboard. She signed a different document. Her contract as general manager of the newly purchased Route 9 Diner specified a salary that was more than twice what she had been making in tips on a good week, a benefits package, and 20% of the annual net profit to be paid at year's end. She would have operating authority over the diner, she would build the staff, she would run the kitchen and the floor and the books. Scales would serve as legal counsel. Forge would stay out of the way unless she needed him. She signed it with this pen that Scales left on the table, a good pen, the kind used to sign things that matter. And when she put it down, her hands were not shaking and her eyes were wet. And she sat in the chair in the kitchen of the apartment for a long time after Scales left in the quiet, looking at the copy of the contract in her hands. Mia came in from the other room and stood in the kitchen doorway. Nora looked at her daughter. She had no words adequate to the moment, so she opened her arms instead. Mia crossed the kitchen and let her mother hold her, and Nora held her with the specific physical fierceness of a woman who has been afraid for her child for a long time and is beginning slowly to believe that the fear might have an ending. The renovations to Route 9 Diner took 6 weeks. The Iron Saints provided the labor, which meant that what had taken a professional crew several months was accomplished over weekends by 32 men who between them covered most of the relevant trades and who worked with the focused energy of people investing in something that belongs to them. The parking lot was repaved. The booths were reupholstered in dark red vinyl. The kitchen was brought fully up to code with equipment that actually worked. The sign outside was replaced with the new One Custom Ironwork letters that Sledge fabricated himself in the machine shop at the compound the Iron Wheel Diner. The name had been Mia's idea. Forge had asked her in the first week after the purchase whether she had any thoughts about what the place should be called, asking with the directness he brought to all questions and the specific quality of attention that communicated he was asking because he wanted to know the answer. She had thought about it for 2 days. Then she had told him. The iron wheel, she said, because wheels keep moving, even when the road is bad. And iron because iron does not break. Scales had it registered as the legal trade name the following morning. The first week the diner reopened under its new name, it was full from 7 in the morning until 8 at night every day. Some of the people who came were coming because the food was good and the coffee was strong, and Nora Decker ran a floor with a precision and warmth that made the place feel like somewhere you wanted to stay. Some were coming because they wanted to see for themselves what the Iron Saints had built. Some were coming because it had been their diner for 15 years and they wanted it back. They were all welcome. Cutter, who had claimed on multiple occasions to be incapable of eating anywhere that did not serve breakfast all day, became a regular. Sledge brought Grace every Sunday morning. By the end of the first month, the corner booth near the window had become the place where the Sunday morning contingent of the club gathered for coffee and the particular quality of noise that comes from large scarred men discussing things they will not discuss anywhere else, and Donna's cherry pie, which Nora had kept exactly as Donna made it because some things should not be changed, was selling out by noon every day. Mia worked the floor on Saturday mornings. She had asked to. She wore a small apron over her dress, and she carried an order pad, and she was from the first Wednesday better at reading a table and anticipating what it needed than several adults who had been waitressing for years, because she was a child who had spent her entire conscious life learning to read what people needed before they said it. She also did her homework at the back booth every afternoon after school, the same booth where Donna had done her books for 30 years, in this continuity which nobody planned and which simply emerged from the logic of the space seemed right to everyone who noticed it. 14 months after a Wednesday morning in May, when 32 motorcycles had turned the corner of Maple Street and shattered the ordinary arithmetic of a Father's Day field day, the property behind the Iron Wheel Diner had been transformed. The club had brought in equipment one weekend in October and carved a track out of the back acreage, a dirt track with a straightaway and 3 berms and a tabletop jump that Sledge had compacted and shaped with the methodical care of a man who had watched a child become someone specific over 14 months and wanted to make sure the specific things she needed were available to her. Mia's 9th birthday fell on a Thursday, and the celebration was on the Saturday following. The morning came in clear and warm, the kind of late June day in Tennessee that is generous with its light, the air not yet thick with the full heat of summer, the ridge beyond the compound visible in the sharp way that early morning makes the distance legible. 32 men gathered behind the diner in the casual configuration of people who have been gathering in the same general formation for years. There was coffee, and there was the smell of the grills starting up, and there was the particular quality of noise that groups of people make when they are genuinely comfortable with each other and with being where they are. The sound of the engine came first, the high, clean whine of a 2-stroke motor. The motor pushed past idle building into the specific frequency of something being asked to do what it was built for. Around the first berm came a matte black Honda 85 cubic centimeters, small and purposeful, its engine singing. The rider was wearing a full-face helmet and a chest protector and a small leather vest over the protector, this one stitched for her specific proportions by a member of the club named Harlow, whose wife had been a seamstress and who had learned enough from watching her work over 20 years to do the job correctly. The vest had one patch on the back, not a rank patch, not a prospect designation, a single patch, a small iron wheel. Mia hit the straightaway and opened the throttle. The engine changed register, climbing through the scale of its capacity. She took the final berm at full commitment, hit the lip of the tabletop jump, and went airborne. She caught 2 feet of air. The landing was clean, the suspension compressing and releasing in the sequence it was designed for, and she brought the bike out of the transition and braked to a stop in a controlled slide 20 feet from where Forge was standing, the rear wheel kicking a rooster tail of dry Tennessee dirt that caught the morning light. She killed the engine. She pulled off her helmet. Her red hair was loose and tangled, her face flushed with the specific aliveness of someone who has just done something that requires everything they have. She looked at Forge with the directness that was the most constant thing about her, the quality that had been present in the parking lot 14 months ago and that had not changed but had deepened, become more settled in her, the way qualities do when they have been tested and held. "Did you see that?" she said. "I cleared the whole table." Forge walked over. He crouched next to the rear wheel and checked the chain tension, running his thumb along the guide in the way he had checked this chain every Saturday morning for 6 months. "You were heavy on the throttle coming out of the second berm," he said. "You carried too much speed into the jump and had to compensate on the landing." Mia looked at the track. She considered this. "I still cleared it," she said. "You did," Forge said. He stood. He looked at her for a moment with those flat gray eyes that had looked at a lot of things in a long life and had learned to see them clearly. "We will work on the entry," he said. "If you want to run qualifiers this fall, you need to be consistent. not just right when everything else lines up. I want to run qualifiers, she said, with the completeness of a person stating something they have already decided. From behind them came the sound of 31 men moving simultaneously, which was not a sound that could be mistaken for anything else in the world. Nora came through the diner's back door carrying nothing her hair loose for the first time in a long time, her face in the morning light looking like a version of itself that the previous year had not made available. She stood on the back step and looked at the scene in front of her, the 32 men and her daughter on the dirt bike and the track in the morning, and she leaned against the door frame and folded her arms and let herself look at it without managing her response to it. Sledge and Cutter came forward with the cake. It was a large cake. It was the kind of cake produced by men who have not made many cakes and have therefore erred in the direction of excess 3 layers of chocolate with frosting that had been applied with enthusiasm, if not finesse, and 9 candles in a cluster at the center. Sledge was holding it with the careful concentration of a very large man handling something fragile and significant. Mia got off the bike. She set her helmet on the seat. She walked over to the truck tailgate where the cake had been placed and stood in front of it and looked at the 9 candles burning in the Tennessee morning. The assembled 32 men and Nora waited. Mia took a breath. She blew out all 9 candles in a single attempt, the way she did most things completely and without leaving anything unfinished. The celebration that followed had the quality of things that are not performing themselves, that are simply what they are. Food from the diner carried out in containers by members of the staff that Nora had hired over the preceding months, people from Millhaven who needed work and who had watched what happened at the town hall and made their own assessment of who they wanted to work for. Music from a speaker that Cutter had set up on the tailgate of his truck. Sledge's daughter, Grace, and Mia at the track, Mia coaching Grace through the first berm on a smaller machine borrowed from a club member's nephew, with the patient direct teaching style of someone who has learned something well enough to explain it. Forge stood at the edge of the gathering and watched all of it. He stood the way he sometimes stood when he did not want to be in the center of a thing, but did not want to leave it either, present at the edge, which was where he had always been most comfortable, the margin of things, able to see the whole of them. He reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a small box, the kind used by jewelers. Dark blue, its hinged lid worn at the corner where he had been carrying it for 3 days. He held it without opening it. Mia found him there. She had been making the rounds of the gathering with the sociable efficiency she had developed over 14 months of Saturday morning shifts at the diner, and she arrived at the edge where Forge was standing and stopped beside him and followed his gaze out over the track and the tree line and the far ridge. They stood in that way for a moment without speaking, the way they had sat in the garage those months ago, in the specific shared quiet of people who have become familiar enough with each other that silence does not require filling. Forge held out the box. She took it. She opened it. The dog tag was solid silver, heavier than it looked, the metal, with the particular warmth of something that has been carried close to a body. One side bore the iron wheel, the club's symbol, precise and clean. She turned it over. The other side was engraved with letters that were cut deep into the metal with the deliberateness of words that are meant to stay. Mia Decker. Family. She read it twice. She looked at the engraving with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. Then she looked up at Forge. He was looking at the ridge. He reached into his jacket again. He took out his wallet. He opened it and removed from the fold behind his license a piece of paper. The paper was soft with age, creased into quarters, the way something gets when it has been folded and unfolded many times over many years. He unfolded it slowly, holding it by the edges, with the care given to things that are fragile in their particular way. It was a drawing in crayon, a man and a girl standing beside a shape that was recognizably a motorcycle, and beside them a small triangular shape with ears. The colors had faded over 20 years to pale suggestions of what they had been, but the shapes were clear, and the intention behind them was clear, and the name written in a child's hand at the bottom was still legible, for Daddy. Love, Lily. Mia looked at the drawing. She looked at it for a long time in the unhurried way she looked at things she was trying to understand completely. "What is that?" she said. Forge looked at it. He was quiet for a moment. "A promise I finally kept," he said. He set the drawing on the tailgate of the nearest truck. He set it face up in the morning sun. He did not fold it back into quarters. He did not put it back in his wallet. He left it there in the light, which was a thing he had not been able to do with it for 20 years, because for 20 years the weight of it had required the specific darkness of a wallet to contain it, and something had changed in the mechanics of that weight, and the change had a name, and the name was standing beside him looking at a dog tag with her own name engraved on it. Mia reached out and took his hand. She did not say anything. She was good at knowing when words were not the right instrument. After a moment, Forge looked down at her. Something in his face had the quality of a thing that has been held at distance for a very long time and is now close enough to touch. His gray eyes had something in them that was not his usual flatness, not the river on a cloudy day steadiness. It was something warmer and more open than that something that had been working its way to the surface through the accumulated months of Saturday mornings and garage conversations and dirt tracks and birthday cakes and a girl who walked across a parking lot with $14 and more courage than most people twice her age. "Let's ride, sweetheart," he said. Mia put on her helmet. She got back on the bike. She fired the engine. The sound it made was small and clean and full of intention. She looked back once. Forge was standing at the edge of the track with his arms crossed and his eyes level, and the drawing of Lily still on the tailgate behind him in the morning light unfolded in the sun for the first time in 20 years. And on the collar of his jacket where the scar ran along his jaw, there was an expression that the 31 men who knew his face best would have recognized if they had been close enough to see it as the thing he had been carrying underneath the flatness all along. It was peace. Mia opened the throttle. She went into the first berm correctly carrying the right amount of speed the way he had told her to. She came out of it clean. She hit the straightaway with the engine singing. She took the tabletop jump and went airborne, and the morning light caught her in the air for one suspended moment above the Tennessee earth, and the 32 men and her mother watching from the edge of the track made the sound that groups of people make when they see something beautiful that they were not certain was possible. And the sound rose up over the diner and the track and the ridge and the longitudinal straight road of Highway 9 that ran through Millhaven and had always run through it and would keep running through it long after this morning was a memory. She landed clean. She rode on. The engine sang. In Millhaven on a Saturday morning in late June, the family of the Iron Saints rode.